So this week, Critical Role have finally launched their brand new flagship RPG, Daggerheart, and it's been heralded as one of the biggest tabletop role-playing releases since GURPS 4th edition in 2004. What do you mean you've never heard of GURPS? But alongside it, Critical Role have also launched their very own community gaming license, aka Daggerheart's very own OGL. That sounds great, except this gaming license has now been reviewed by the community, and there are claims from creatives that Matt Mercer and Critical Role have actually replicated Hasbro's infamous OGL wording changes that led to that dreaded OGL scandal from yesteryear that almost toppled Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, there are even allegations that this new license gives Critical Role overly oppressive powers, such as shutting down fan websites, stealing the content of other creators, forcing creators to agree to terms that they haven't even seen yet, and perhaps worst of all, suspending habeas corpus in the jurisdiction of Liberia. Okay, well, I threw that last one in. But overall, apparently Critical Role are being just as nasty as Hasbro at their worst, and this is developing into a major scandal. A lot of people are starting to look askew at Matt Mercer and the gang. And I'll be honest, I didn't really believe these allegations at first. They seemed a little bit insane to me, but after investigating this myself, actually, my mind has been completely changed. So it looks like we're gonna have to get some lawyers on the horn for this one. Lawyers like... We were just about to defeat the Dark Lord Drakthor Spell Stealer when an overly vigorous die roll from Bluto Ironchild, our half-gnome, half-satyr Lithium Mancer, resulted in a metal D4 becoming permanently lodged in my buttocks, preventing me from ever again sitting down at a gaming table. Luckily though, I was insured for dice-related mishaps. But when I visited my insurer, they said that because I was playing GURPS, the ambitious and strikingly unconventional 1980s tabletop role-playing game, they wouldn't pay out. Then they held me down and forced me to eat my character sheet. They forcibly tattooed the word Sprug on my head and told me to look in the mirror. It was humiliating. Has this ever happened to you? Every day, role players experience life-altering events just like this one. Luckily, Morgan & Morgan might be able to help. Because when you've been injured, you deserve justice and money. Your injury could be even worth millions. But taking on big companies requires a big law firm. And as America's largest injury law firm, Morgan & Morgan are ready to take on insurance companies of every size. If you hire Morgan & Morgan, you don't just get a single lawyer, you get an army of lawyers, and they will fight for you. And even better, the fee is absolutely free unless you win. Morgan & Morgan have modernized the injury law process so you can throw out your pager. All you'll need to submit a claim and communicate with your legal team is a smartphone. So if you are ever in an accident, you can start a claim with Morgan & Morgan in just a click. Simply go to www.forthepeople.com/dungeons or click the link in the description below and you'll be taken right there. And thanks to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's video. And remember, GURPS players are people too. GURPS players humanity not guaranteed. No, not those lawyers. As a YouTube burnout that's struggling to afford a predatory loan on some very unwise bus tickets, I'll take a shot at it instead. So, this is the Critical Role Community Gaming License. This basically sets out the legal rules and obligations that you must obey if you want to safely publish, modify, or create content for Daggerheart, especially if you want to sell your work for money and potentially earn a living. Now, that sounds like a really boring read, and as someone who has read it, yeah, it is. But like most legal stuff, it's also really important. Sometimes you just really need to know how far away the school can be. And in this case, this gaming license sets out the rules for third parties that want to make and sell content around Daggerheart. And these types of gaming license are not unusual in the TTRPG space. In fact, they're pretty fundamental. They ensure that content creators can make and homebrew content around existing RPGs and not get the absolute shit suit out of them for the trouble. With a license like this, creatives don't need to rely on things like fair fair use arguments in court. They can simply say, look buddy, I'm working in an existing license framework here. Let me continue to make my Catboy sleepover supplement, damn it! Get off my back, the man! The people demand Catboy sleepovers. And these licenses have a huge impact on your home game and what you can play at your table too. For example, Dungeons & Dragons has a ton of pornographic supplements, and that's only because of its very liberal license. Praise be to horny Jesus, i.e. Ryan Dancey, the guy who came up with all this stuff. Without the D&D open gaming license, we wouldn't see classic jams like the Pleasure Prison of the Bethuthian Demon Whore or Fizzle Dick's Fun Palace. I mean, Hasbro aren't gonna make those. There's a gap in the market. Nice. But also, I've been assured that there's some popular non-pornographic D&D third-party supplements out there too, although I've never played them. And so then, it was no surprise that when Daggerheart launched, it launched with its very own open gaming license to rival D&D. After all, Critical Role have clearly been intending for Daggerheart to become the alternative gaming system to Dungeons & Dragons, sort of like the communist bloc to the Western world in the latter half of the 20th century, but more saturated and with slightly more little frog guys. Okay, so let's get into it then. This is the new open gaming license for Daggerheart, but what are people actually alleging specifically? Well, creatives within the Daggerheart community are claiming that this license is just simply terrible for players. They're arguing that the RPG community should be just as outraged at Critical Role for this gaming license as they were at Hasbro Wizards during the height of the OGL scandal when D&D faced oblivion itself. And I've even heard some people argue that the only reason that Critical Role are even getting a pass right now where Hasbro Wizards did not is that the Daggerheart community are simply too busy fangirling for Matt Mercer, or they simply do not understand how bad this community license really is. They don't understand the stakes. So that's what people are arguing, but is it actually true? Well, I mean, I kind of hate to say it, but there is some truth to some of this. Maybe not the fangirling part and all the expletives, but let's look at it. Okay, so for example, here is section 5 of the community license, and frankly, on the face of it, this is a really insane clause. And although it's not the worst, we'll get to that one later, this one is still pretty horrible, because as written, this lays out that if you are someone who is selling or making content for Daggerheart, it essentially allows Darrington Press to take your work and sell it as their own. And it even goes further, preventing you from suing them in court as a remedy. In fact, if you work on Daggerheart content, you basically have to agree to give up any claim to your content at all now and in the future. And yeah, that does sound really horrible. And this was exactly one of the massive issues that people had with Hasbro's changes to the open gaming license during their own OGL scandal. So what the hell gives? Why is this in here? Does Matt Mercer really want to steal all your obviously amazing Sonic and Daggerheart ideas and sell them as his own? Does he want your brain? Well, if I were to defend this clause, I'd argue that it exists because Daggerheart is being actively developed as a game right now. This is a totally new franchise, and we're probably going to see tons of future supplements come out of Darrington Press going forward, covering all sorts of different ancestries, new classes, gameplay mechanics, new items, new settings, and, if we're lucky, anal circumference rules. And probably all of these will come belabored with fantasy terms and names that have probably, if we're honest, cropped up somewhere before. And when developing any content for a game, you're always going to be stepping on the toes of other creatives because there's only just so much design space that you can work in, especially when you have a new marketplace of third-party creators also making new supplements and content for your game. I mean, in that context, coincidences often happen, similar designs occur, and parallel design is a real thing. Like Dennis the Menace. Genuinely, both of these were independently made in the same week. So I suspect that the reason this section even exists is so that the designers at Darrington Press can make anything they want without worrying about whether their designs are too similar to some already existing third-party supplement. And it protects Critical Role from being sued when they inevitably create something that has already been done before in the Daggerheart third-party marketplace. You just don't want to license the design of your game out to total strangers and allow them to work with your game and then have all that limit what you can do as the designer. That kinda sucks. And it sucks for both Critical Role and for us as players. If somebody comes out with half-assed Daggerheart mechanics around breaking and entering pensioners' homes to steal their lampshades, do we really want Darrington Press to just not be able to make a better official version of that just because they're worried they get sued? That's kinda lame. Let me break into pensioners' homes, Critical Role. So this section makes sense from that perspective. However, it still goes way too far, because the section says that the only time that you can ever bring legal action against Darrington Press if they've copied you is if they have identically copied your content in its entirety and without modification, which, to be honest, is a really high bar to satisfy, to the extent that it might just be impossible. Like proving that you didn't steal socks belonging to your roommate. I can't prove a negative, Jeff! Stop pushing expired packets of ham under my door! But for example, if say tomorrow I were to create my very own ancestry in Daggerheart, let's call them the Butt Gnomes. Here they are. They love singing, dancing, and sectarian violence. And say I started selling these Butt Gnomes in cool ancestry cards under the Daggerheart community license, and the entire community just couldn't get enough of my little short kings obsessed with proctology. And they turned out to be a massive success. I was riding high on all that praise. And money. But then, next week, Critical Role just happened to create their very own new ancestry cards for their brand new official ancestry, the Rectum Gnomes, who also happen to be vertically challenged prostate examiners. And then everybody just started buying those official products instead of mine because, well, they're official. And it doesn't matter if this new ancestry was obviously inspired by my own popular creation, right down to the same ancestry ability, I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. I'd have a hard time arguing in court that I deserve any remedy or compensation because I've agreed to create content under this community license by simply making any content at all for Daggerheart. And as a result, all the Critical Role have to argue is that the Rectum Gnomes are not a one-to-one copy of my Butt Gnomes. I mean, the name is different, the wording on their ancestry ability is different, and their artwork has way deeper cum gutters. It's still the same idea, but it's not identical, even if the result is that the community have abandoned my own content in favor of the official version now. That's way worse, by the way. The Butt Gnomes are much better than the Rectum Gnomes. And then the result of that is that my content would no longer sell, and I'd become destitute and have to sell my digital likeness to AI porn generators and eventually die alone, broke, retroactively at the ripe age of 16. Orphaned. Happy now, Matt? You're killing orphans now. And that risk that Critical Role could take my content and monetize it, that might be small, but it would make me as a creator pretty wary about ever building any content for Daggerheart, especially considering that other gaming licenses, like the Orc license that are used by Paizo and Chaosium, they don't replicate this clause. As far as I can see, they have nothing like that in there. This is unique to Daggerheart. And there's other problems in here as well. For example, there's no mention of whether the license is perpetual or irrevocable, both legal terms which were at the center of the original OGL scandal when Hasbro tried to change the wording of their own license so that they could deauthorize previous versions of the Open Gaming license, meaning that anyone wanting to work on D&D content would have to update to the new version that happened to come with even worse terms. In this case, Critical Role have actually just gone further than that, because in perhaps the most insane and potentially dangerous clauses for third-party creators, they've just come out of the gate saying that they can change the terms of this license at any time. And if you're making Daggerheart content, you must agree with the new terms, whatever they'll be, or else you'll never be able to update your content again. In section 11 of the community license, it says that Darrington Press can modify or revise the license terms whenever they want. They don't even have to let you know about it beyond merely making a Twitter post. And then if you continue to sell your work, it's just assumed under 11.2 that you know about the changes and that you've accepted any changes to the license. That sounds okay, I guess, but remember what's happened before in this hobby. Hasbro once tried to get third parties to pay them a license fee for using their gaming license by simply updating the gaming license terms to say, you have to pay a license fee now. There's nothing to stop Critical Role from updating this license with the exact same terms. And then, if you don't agree with having to pay money to Critical Role or anything else they want you to do, like pledging allegiance to the Shah of Iran, Too bad. If you want to keep adding to your content, if you want to update your work, you're gonna have to agree to anything they want. Again, this does not show up in other open gaming licenses. In fact, the Orc license from Paizo and Chaosium explicitly says that it cannot be amended, superseded, modified, updated, repealed, revoked, or deauthorized. Why is that not in here too? Why did Critical Role not promise the same thing? And there's even more. Under section 1.9, where the license says what type of content is permitted under the license, technically it only permits physical and digital print books, cards and manuals, live streaming, and video and podcasts. So if you're not making content in one of those formats, arguably Darrington Press, Critical Role, they can come after you. Such as, for example, if you happen to run a fan website. So yeah, there's actually a lot of problems with this license, and I hate to say it, but Hasbro are actually being way more player friendly with Dungeons and Dragons than Critical Role are with Daggerheart, at least as far as providing an open gaming license goes. And that really sucks. I had hoped for much better from Critical Role, but this right now, this license is very restrictive and draconian. And people know that. There's communities of creators right now who have told me that they are refusing to touch Daggerheart as it stands. And that really sucks. That is scandalous. And I hope that Darrington Press update the language to be more open. However, that said, there are people out there claiming that this license is as bad as the D&D license that was at the heart of the OGL scandal. I don't think that's true. This is not quite as bad as that. For example, Critical Role, they're not demanding that anybody pay them money for daring to make content for Daggerheart. They're not trying to change the details of the license secretly and pressure third parties into agreeing with it. But nevertheless, this is getting really close to what Hasbro wanted during the OGL scandal. And it's insane to think that something this anti-creator, this anti-fan, has come out of a company run by Critical Role. They should know better. But that isn't to say that Critical Role here are trying to screw the community. Remember, Critical Role, Matt Mercer, they're not as big as Hasbro, and TTRPG licensing is super niche. I'm not sure if Darrington Press even have an in-house legal team familiar with the market the way that Hasbro Wizards do. This is Darrington Press's first attempt at a big community license like this, but I do think that it needs another pass. It needs to be amended, because it's actually in the interest of Critical Role to have as many independent creators start making homebrew content, third-party content for Daggerheart in order to rival Dungeons and Dragons. I was actually thinking of making some new content myself, maybe some sort of cum-guttered butt gnome. Yeah, that'd be a good ancestry. Yeah. And by being open, it's the only way that Daggerheart will ever be able to rival Dungeons and Dragons, and that's what I kind of want. And look, people want to make stuff for this game. There's already tons of awesome content and tools out there right now already. It's been really inspiring seeing all the stuff that people have come out with. There's clearly a massive community behind Daggerheart, and I just want more content. And Critical Role, Matt Mercer, obviously, they get that because they just released a new tool for generating cards. So I think their heart is in the right place, but hopefully the terms of this license get reviewed and Critical Role makes some big changes, because right now, people are right to be outraged. Right now, this is a scandal, and we should all be looking at this with a bit of a cautious eye. But I'll be following this as it develops, so subscribe to the channel if you want to continue to see content like this, and if you do appreciate this type of in-depth coverage and want to help me continue to make this type of content on YouTube, please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Discourse Miniatures and support me there, because the summer sun is baking my flesh and I would really like a roof, please. And thanks to my patrons, especially CryptoKev, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye bye.